Hey, it's time for story time with me, Ms. B. And we've already read the prologue to Founding Rivals, Madison versus Monroe, the Bill of Rights and the Election That Saved a Nation, written by Chris DeRose. So today we're going to learn just a little bit. Um, we're not going to read this whole book, but I want to start with chapter one, a little bit on the background of Madison, since we do learn so much about him, especially in the first unit. And chapter one is called The Last Days of the Colony of Virginia, with a quote by John Adams. Then and there, the child independence was born. 100 miles north of where the English first settled in the New World, James Madison and James Monroe were born within a decade and 20 miles of each other. In 1751, Madison arrived in the calm before the storm. In 1758, Monroe was born into a world at war. The French and Indian War, which began in 1754 and ended in 1763, saw the English expel their rivals from the continent, and it would set in motion the great events that would dominate the lives of these two sons of Virginia. So there's just an image of the 7 Years' War, which they refer to also as the French and Indian War. On the day of his baptism, the infant James Madison, seen here, not as an infant, of course, was attended by his 5 godparents. Thus, the requirement was met: not fewer than 3 godparents, with at least 2 of the same sex as the child, and at least 1 of the opposite sex. The rite would be performed according to the 1662 Book of Common Prayer, used in the Church of England the world over, including in this far-flung outpost of the British Empire, in the Hanover Parish Church, on the River Rappahannock in the county of King George, Virginia. Those gathered that morning for the baptism of James Madison were there in the belief that the infant could become a new creation. Aside from the monarchy, no institution was more enduring or revered in Virginia than the Church of England. Yet as time passed, the cultural, religious, and political ties between England and her colonies would be strained. The central question of the day would be whether Virginia, created as a colony, could be reborn as something else. At the time of Madison's birth, momentous events that would put the question to the test were already in play. British victory in the French and Indian War could come at a catastrophic financial cost. And French diplomats Charles Grivier, well, I'll show you here, Comte de Vergennes, would predict with great presence, "I am persuaded," he said, "England will ere long repent of having removed the only check that could keep her colonies in awe. They stand no longer in need of her protection. She will call on them to contribute toward supporting the burdens they have helped to bring on her, and they will answer by striking off all dependence." Indeed, the British Parliament would attempt to pass some of the costs of the war onto her colonies. What followed was a vicious cycle of rising colonial resistance and British retaliation. Madison and Monroe were both descendants of 17th century Virginia colonists. So let's think not long after Jamestown that we learned about. Isaac Madison had arrived in Virginia in 1611, 4 years after Jamestown became the first permanent English settlement in America, and 9 years before the arrival of the Mayflower. Madison flourished in the New World. He also established a reputation as an Indian fighter. In March of 1622, he accepted the charge of the governor of the Virginia colony to lead a force to rescue colonists seized by Indians in a raid. Isaac's success as a planter grew, and he gained exclusive trading rights with the Indian in the Chesapeake Bay. 14 years after settling in Virginia, he died and was buried in the land where he had found wealth, adventure, prestige, and love, but far from his original home. James Madison, future political colossus, was no rugged pioneer in the mold of his ancestor. By the time James was born in 1751, Virginia was a thriving colony. James Madison was born while his mother was visiting the home of her mother in King George County. When mother and child were strong enough, they departed for Orange County, and the estate that would one day be known as Montpelier. It would be Madison's home for his entire life. Madison was a dedicated student. He began his formal studies in 1762 under Donald Robertson, who had been educated at the University of Aberdeen. Then he became the pupil of Thomas Martin, a brief association that would change the course of Madison's life. Madison had attended school at the College of New Jersey, located on the road between Philadelphia and New York at Princeton, and today known as Princeton University. The college at Princeton had an excellent reputation, in contrast with the College of William and Mary, which at the time no longer had a well-regarded and rigorous program of study. Princeton had the additional benefit of geography. Madison's parents felt that the climate farther north, as opposed to the hot and sticky weather in Williamsburg, would be better for the sickly Madison. Madison passed the College of New Jersey's entrance exam, which required grammatical Latin, Greek translation, and vulgar arithmetic. The author of the First Amendment would be educated at a school with a remarkable degree of religious diversity for its time, founded as it was for the equal and general advantage of every religious denomination of Protestants. Madison had roughly 150 fellow students in the entire school. For perhaps the first time in his life, the curious and scholarly young man was in his element. Far from Orange County, Madison was meeting brilliant peers from places and backgrounds he previously had only read about. The school was a tight-knit community, as all the pupils and their tutors would eat together, sometimes joined by the college president. Madison wrote to his mentor Martin from school in August of 1769. I am perfectly pleased with my present situation, and the prospect before me of 3 years' confinement, however terrible it may sound, has nothing in it, but it will be greatly alleviated by the advantages I hope to derive from it. Madison plunged into his academic work, studying to the point of physical exhaustion and illness. At Princeton, he had access to a library exceeding 1,200 volumes. Madison studied science, geography, rhetoric, logic, math, natural and moral philosophy, metaphysics, chronology. He read Latin and Greek and pored over classical texts. The college day began with prayer and ended in the evening with another devotional service. Madison was a model student. College president John Witherspoon never knew him to say or do an indiscreet thing. He joined a fraternal organization, the Whigs, who playfully jousted in public debates with their rivals, the Cleosophians. The college put an emphasis on oratory. Students were required to engage one another in front of large audiences. For the quiet and introverted Madison, this aspect of his education was invaluable. Even as trouble was brewing back home in Virginia, political tensions were increasing between Crown and colony. Madison was debating academic issues on a stage next to a giant portrait of King George III. After 3 years of study, Madison was examined by trustees, college officers, and other gentlemen of learning, and received his degree. He had finished a 4-year program in 3. Madison returned to Orange County in 1772. In Orange, Madison was isolated. He kept himself busy by tutoring his younger siblings in literature. Correspondence with his former classmate, William Bradford, in Philadelphia, was his only connection to the outside world he left behind, and also a source of news about the historic events brewing in the colonies. Bradford was concerned about his friend's well-being. He believed that Madison had injured himself by excessive study, and he urged him to be attentive to his health. Even naturally sickly people can outlive healthy ones by working at it, Bradford wrote to the man who would live to be the last of the founders. Prophetically, Bradford wrote to Madison that you seem designed by Providence for extensive usefulness. At the time, the observation must have seemed like so much fluff to Madison. He was bored, lonely, doing nothing with his life, and without prospects for a change. Bradford kept Madison abreast of the lives of their friends and acquaintances, their career advancements, successes, and marriages. The world, it seemed, was passing by. He was confined in the cash-poor agricultural economy of the Virginia colony, where his father was a planter just as his ancestors had been, back to the days of Isaac. And I'll leave with one more paragraph. His time away from home had caused Madison to see Virginia in a new light. Madison was concerned about the lack of religious liberty in his home colony, and he asked Bradford to send him a colony of Pennsylvania's religious tolerance laws. Is an ecclesiastical establishment absolutely necessary to support civil society? He asked. Madison was increasingly concerned with the treatment of religious dissenters in neighboring counties. Some were in prison on account of their faith. So I'll leave it with that. I'll look at some of the questions that we will have on Canvas, and I'd like to see what your thoughts are. And we'll have another story time again soon.